If your income stops when you stop working, you don't have a career, you have a dependency. And the uncomfortable part is, most people don't even realize it. They wake up early, rush through the morning, sit in traffic, answer emails, solve problems, hit deadlines. And at the end of it all, they get paid. And for a moment, that paycheck feels like proof. Proof that things are working. Proof that life is under control, but it's not control. It's a trade. Time for survival. And the moment that trade stops, everything you thought was stable starts to shake. More than half of Americans today are living paycheck to paycheck. Not because they're irresponsible. Not because they don't care about their future, but because they've been following a path that was designed to feel safe, not to make them free. You see it everywhere. Once you start paying attention, the co-worker who finally got the promotion but now works longer hours and looks more exhausted than ever. The friend who makes good money but quietly admits they can't afford to stop for even a few months. The family member who spent years building a career, only to lose it in a single conversation when the company decided to restructure. I've seen it up close. A friend of mine, Jason, did everything right. Good education, strong work ethic, a stable, well-paying job. From the outside, his life looked secure, predictable, safe. Until one morning, it wasn't. A short meeting, a few sentences, and just like that, his role was gone. What stayed with me wasn't just the fact that he lost his job. It was how fast everything changed after that. The income didn't slowly fade. It didn't give him time to adjust. It disappeared. Completely. Same person, same skills, same discipline, but no system behind it meant no income. And in that moment, he realized something most people spend years avoiding. He hadn't been building freedom. He had been maintaining a system that only worked as long as he kept showing up. That realization hits deeper than fear. Because once you see it, you can't go back to pretending everything is fine. You start asking different questions. Not how can I earn more, but what happens if I stop? Not how do I get ahead, but why does it feel like I'm always one step away from falling behind? This video is about answering those questions honestly. Not with hype, not with empty promises, but with a different way of thinking about income. One that isn't tied to your hours, your presence, or your constant effort. A way of building something that continues, even when you step away. Something that grows quietly in the background instead of demanding all of your time in the foreground. It doesn't start with a big move. It starts with awareness. Because the truth is, you don't need to work harder to change your life. You need to stop relying on a system that can disappear overnight and start building one that doesn't. So stay with me. And if you know someone who's still stuck in that cycle, working hard, doing everything right, but never really moving forward, share this video with them. It might be the moment that changes how they see their life. Chapter 1. You're not paid to be free. There's a quiet assumption most people carry without ever questioning it. If you work hard enough, you'll eventually be free. It sounds reasonable. It feels logical. It's the story almost everyone grows up believing. But if you look closely at how people actually live, something doesn't match that promise. They work harder, they earn more, and somehow they feel less in control of their lives. That's not a coincidence. And here's the part most people never stop to consider. The system you're in doesn't reward freedom, it rewards dependence. The more reliable you are, the more valuable you become. The more valuable you become, the more is expected of you. And the more is expected of you, the harder it becomes to step away. It's not broken. It's working exactly as designed. I remember sitting across from a colleague named Daniel not long after he got promoted. Bigger title, higher salary, more recognition. From the outside, it looked like a clear win, the kind people aim for. Everyone congratulated him. He smiled, thanked them, and stepped into the role like he was supposed to. A few weeks later, we met for coffee after work. He looked different. Not in an obvious way, but enough that you could feel it. The kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from something heavier. At one point, he let out a quiet laugh and said, "I thought this would feel better." I asked him what he meant. He took a second, then said, "I make more money now, but I feel like I own less of my life." That sentence stays with you because it exposes something people don't usually say out loud. The promotion didn't give him freedom. It increased the cost of his time. His phone didn't stop buzzing. His calendar filled weeks ahead. Even when he wasn't working, his attention was still tied to it. There was always something waiting, something unresolved, something pulling him back in. And the lifestyle that came with that raise adapted just as fast. Better apartment, higher expenses, more commitments. So now, stepping away wasn't just uncomfortable, it was risky. This is the part no one explains when they tell you to earn more. Income can increase, but so can dependence. And when your entire life is built around a paycheck, even a bigger paycheck doesn't change the structure. It just raises the cost of staying inside it. Research has shown that beyond a certain level of income, what impacts people most isn't how much they earn, but how much control they have over their time. In other words, the difference between feeling trapped and feeling free isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in autonomy. That's why someone can earn more and still feel stuck. Because the structure hasn't changed. There's a word for this, but it's rarely used honestly. People call it a career. But in many cases, it becomes a system of controlled survival. You trade your time for money. Then you use that money to support a life that requires you to keep trading your time. And without realizing it, you've built a loop that depends entirely on your presence. What makes this powerful is that it doesn't feel like a trap. It feels normal. Everyone around you is doing the same thing. Same routine, same expectations, same quiet trade happening every day. So there's no obvious signal that something is wrong. Until something interrupts it. A company changes direction, a role gets eliminated. Life forces you to step away for reasons you didn't plan for, and suddenly the structure reveals itself. Because when your income is directly tied to your presence, the moment you're not there, the income isn't either. I saw this in a way that stayed with me. A friend of mine named Lisa had a steady job for years. Nothing flashy, but stable, predictable, enough to feel safe. Then her mother became seriously ill. It wasn't sudden, but it reached a point where Lisa had to make a choice. She chose to step back from work to take care of her. It felt like the right decision, but within a few months, the reality started to show up. Her savings began to shrink. Bills continued as usual. The safety she thought she had built started to feel temporary. Not because she made a mistake, but because her income depended entirely on her ability to show up every day. That's when it becomes real. Not theoretical. Not something you read about. Real. And here's the shift that changes everything once you see it clearly. The problem isn't that you have a job. The problem is when your job is your only system. Because a salary, no matter how high, is still limited by something you cannot expand endlessly. Your time. You can work more hours, but only to a point. You can increase your value, but only within certain limits. Eventually, you reach a ceiling. Not because you're not capable, but because the structure itself is limited. This is where most people get stuck. They try to solve the problem by pushing harder, earning more, climbing higher. But all of that happens inside the same system. And the system hasn't changed. You're not stuck because you lack ability. You're stuck because you accepted the rules without questioning what they lead to. The real shift begins when you ask a different question. Not how can I earn more from my time, but how can I build something that isn't limited by it? That question changes the direction completely. It forces you to think beyond effort, beyond hours, beyond constant presence. It might start small. A skill you develop. A product you create. Something that delivers value even when you're not actively working in that moment. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to exist independently of you. Because the moment something you create continues to work without your constant input, even in a small way, you've broken the pattern. And once that pattern breaks, even slightly, your direction changes. Daniel eventually understood this. He didn't quit his job. He didn't make a dramatic move. He just started building something on the side, 1 hour at a time, learning, experimenting, adjusting. At first, it didn't look significant, but it was different. Because for the first time, he wasn't just trading time for money. He was building something that could operate without him. And that distinction changes everything. You don't escape the salary trap by rejecting work. You escape it by changing what your work creates. Because in the end, it's not about how much you earn. It's about whether your income depends entirely on you, or whether you've built something that can continue even when you don't. And until that changes, nothing else will. Chapter 2. The security you trust is quietly disappearing. There's a moment most people remember, even if they don't say it out loud. The first time they realized that something they thought was stable wasn't. It doesn't always arrive as a shock. Sometimes it slips in quietly. A conversation that lingers a little longer than expected. A headline you scroll past but keep thinking about. A small change at work that doesn't seem important until it is. And once you notice it, something shifts. The idea of a secure job doesn't collapse. It just stops feeling solid. For a long time, security meant something simple. You get a job, you stay consistent, you build trust. And over time, that trust turns into stability. That was the agreement, and for a while, it worked. But the world changed, and the agreement didn't come with it. A few years ago, I met someone named Eric at a small networking event. He had spent more than a decade at the same company. Not chasing trends, not jumping roles. Just steady, reliable progress. He wasn't the loudest person in the room, but he was respected. The kind of person people assume will always be okay. At one point, he told me almost casually, "I've been here long enough that I don't really worry about job security anymore." He said it like it was something he had earned. 6 months later, we spoke again. The tone had changed. His department had been restructured. Not because he failed, not because he made a mistake. The company was simply adapting. New priorities, new systems, fewer roles. His position no longer fit. What stayed with me wasn't just the outcome, it was the confusion behind it. How can something I've built for years disappear in a decision I wasn't part of? That question cuts deeper than frustration. Because it challenges a belief most people don't even realize they carry. That loyalty creates security. And here's what most people don't see coming. The system doesn't need you to fail. It just needs you to stay replaceable. It rewards efficiency, not attachment. And efficiency doesn't need as many people. According to research from McKinsey & Company, a large share of current work activities could be automated in the coming years. Not just repetitive labor, but thinking tasks, analysis, communication, decisions that once felt like they required a human touch. This doesn't mean everything disappears overnight, but it does mean something quieter is happening. The ground beneath what we call security is shifting, and it's happening slowly enough that most people adjust without realizing it. They work a little longer, stay available a little later, try to become more useful, more needed, more irreplaceable. But here's the paradox. The harder you try to stay needed inside the system, the more you tie your value to it. And the more you tie your value to it, the less control you actually have. There's another version of this that doesn't show up as a sudden loss. It shows up as a slow decline. A friend of mine named Marcus worked in a highly respected field. Skilled, dependable, the person people relied on when things got complicated. For years, his knowledge gave him leverage. Then new tools began to appear. At first, they felt like support. They made the work faster, Easier, more efficient. No threat, just progress. But over time, those tools improved. They didn't just assist, they replaced parts of the process. Marcus didn't lose his job, but something changed. The value of what he knew started to shrink. Not because he became less capable, but because the system found a way to produce similar results with less dependence on him. And that's the shift most people don't prepare for. Not losing your position, losing your leverage. He said something to me one day that stayed with me. It's strange. I'm still here, still doing the work, but I don't feel as necessary as I used to. That feeling is subtle, but it changes everything. Negotiation becomes harder. Options become fewer. The sense of control you thought you had begins to fade, even if your job title doesn't. And here's the twist most people don't expect. The problem isn't that the world is becoming less stable. The problem is that we're still depending on stability as the foundation of our lives. Stability feels safe because it's predictable. But predictability isn't the same as control. And anything you don't control can change without asking you first. You don't feel uncertain because you're weak. You feel uncertain because, deep down, you can sense that this structure isn't built to last the way you were told it would. So the question begins to change. It's no longer, is my job safe? It becomes, if this disappears, what remains? That question doesn't create fear. It creates clarity. Because real security doesn't come from a role. It comes from your ability to create value beyond that role. Your ability to adapt, to build, to generate something that doesn't depend on a single system continuing exactly as it is. Eric eventually reached that point. At first, he did what most people do. He tried to rebuild the same structure somewhere else. Another company, another position, another version of what he lost. But something in his thinking had shifted. He didn't trust the system the same way anymore. So alongside his new job, he started exploring, learning skills he had ignored before, building small projects, testing ideas that didn't require permission. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fast, but it was different. Because for the first time, his sense of security didn't come from one place, and that changes how you move. You stop chasing certainty and start building resilience. You stop asking the system to protect you and start creating something that can continue, even if it doesn't. Because in the end, the safest path is not the one that looks the most stable. It's the one that doesn't break when stability does. Chapter 3. Systems are what set you free. Most people believe the path forward is simple. Work harder. Stay consistent. Keep pushing. And for a while that works. You earn more. You gain experience. You feel like you're moving in the right direction. But then something subtle starts to happen. The more effort you put in, the more everything begins to depend on you. Every result is tied to your time. Every dollar is tied to your presence. Every step forward requires you to show up again. That's when progress starts to feel heavy. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because the structure itself hasn't changed. There's a different question that most people never ask. Not how can I make more money, but how many times can I get paid for the same work? That question shifts everything, because it moves you out of effort and into leverage. Most people live in a loop where every action leads to a single outcome. You work once, you get paid once. Then you start again. It feels productive, but it resets every time. And anything that resets can never truly grow. I saw a different path through someone I knew named Amanda. She wasn't trying to build a business. She wasn't chasing anything big. She just had a way of taking complex information and making it simple. At work, that made her reliable. Outside of work, it felt like just another skill. People would often ask her for help. Friends, co-workers, even people online. How do you make things so easy to understand? At first, she would answer when she had time. A message here, a quick explanation there. Nothing structured, nothing intentional. But over time, she started noticing something. She was repeating the same explanations again and again. Same ideas, same steps, same process. One night, instead of replying to another message, she did something small. She wrote it all down, not perfectly, not professionally, just clearly. A simple guide that explained how she thought. She didn't expect much from it. She shared it quietly. At first, nothing happened. Then a few people downloaded it. Then a few more. And then something shifted. People started sharing it with others, without her involvement. That was the moment things felt different. She woke up one morning and saw that people had bought something she created while she was asleep. It wasn't a huge amount, but it wasn't about the number. It was about what it represented. For the first time, her work continued without her. That changes how you see everything, because you realize that effort doesn't have to be repeated to create value. It can be captured, it can be structured, it can continue. And that's what a system really is. Not something complex, not something only businesses build. A system is simply something that keeps working after you've done the work. It could be a product, a piece of content, a process, an asset. The form doesn't matter. The independence does. Most people are stuck in a pattern where nothing continues without them. You stop, everything stops. You pause, everything pauses. You step away, everything waits. That's not growth. That's maintenance. And here's the part most people don't expect. You don't need a perfect idea to build a system. You just need to stop repeating yourself without capturing the value you're creating. Amanda didn't invent something new. She simply stopped giving the same effort away for free. She turned repetition into structure, and structure into something that could exist without her. That's the first step. A small break in the pattern. I saw a similar shift happen with someone else, but in a completely different way. Kevin was a freelancer, skilled, consistent, always busy. His calendar was full. His income was steady. But everything he earned came from projects that ended. He would complete the work, get paid, and then start from zero again. At one point, he noticed something. A large portion of his work wasn't unique. Different clients, same problems. Different requests, same solutions. So instead of continuing the cycle, he tried something different. He built a template. It took more time up front, more thinking, more effort. But once it was done, something changed. He didn't have to start from scratch anymore. He refined it, improved it, and eventually he offered it as a product. At first, it felt strange, getting paid without actively working. But then it became normal, and then it became scalable, because the result no longer depended entirely on his time. It depended on the system he built. That's the difference most people miss. Effort is linear. Systems create leverage, and leverage changes the relationship between time and income. You can only work a limited number of hours, but a system can continue indefinitely. While you rest, while you focus on something else, while you're not even thinking about it. And once you experience that, even in a small way, your thinking shifts. You stop asking how to do more, and start asking what can continue. This doesn't mean you stop working. It means your work starts building something beyond the immediate result, something that accumulates, something that compounds over time. And here's the deeper shift. You begin to see your effort differently, not as something to spend, but as something to invest. Amanda didn't quit her job after her first success. Kevin didn't abandon freelancing overnight, but both of them changed direction. They stopped building income that disappears and started building income that continues. That shift isn't dramatic, it's quiet. But once it happens, it doesn't reverse. Because you can't unsee the difference. You begin to notice where your time is going, where your effort is being used, and where it's being lost. And slowly, you start building differently. Not just for today, but for something that keeps working tomorrow. Because in the end, freedom doesn't come from how hard you work. It comes from what your work becomes. Chapter 4. You don't escape all at once. There's a moment that stops most people before they even begin. It's not lack of motivation. It's not lack of intelligence. It's the feeling that what they want to build is too far away from where they are now. They look at people who seem free, people who have systems, businesses, income that runs without them. And instead of feeling inspired, they feel behind. Because the gap feels too big, so they wait. They wait for more time, more clarity, more confidence, and without realizing it, waiting becomes the reason nothing changes. What most people don't understand is this: no one escapes in one move. There's no single decision that suddenly replaces your entire life. The real shift is smaller than that, quieter, almost invisible at first. It starts with how you use 1 hour. I remember a period in my own life where everything felt full, but nothing felt like progress. Work took most of the day. Evenings disappeared into distractions that felt harmless at the time. Scrolling, watching, resting just enough to repeat the same routine the next morning. There was no space left for anything new, or at least that's what it felt like. But when I actually looked closer, there were fragments of time scattered throughout the day. 30 minutes here, 40 minutes there. Time that didn't feel significant enough to matter. So it was never used intentionally. One night, almost out of frustration, I decided to try something simple. Just 1 hour. Not a full plan, not a big goal. Just 1 hour focused on building something that didn't depend on my job. At first, it felt slow, unimpressive. There was no immediate reward, no clear outcome, just effort without visible results. And that's where most people stop. Because we're used to effort producing something right away. You work, you get paid, you finish a task, you see the result. But when you start building something new, especially something that isn't tied to your time, the feedback is delayed. You don't see progress immediately. And that makes it easy to believe nothing is happening. But something is happening, it's just not visible yet. A friend of mine named Ryan went through something similar. He worked long hours, came home exhausted, and convinced himself that he didn't have time to build anything else. But one day, after a conversation we had, he tried something small. He set aside 1 hour. No pressure, no expectation. Just 1 hour to learn a skill he had been putting off. At first, it felt like a sacrifice. Less time to relax. Less time to disconnect. But after a few weeks, something shifted. That hour stopped feeling like a cost. It started feeling like an investment. He wasn't just consuming anymore. He was creating. And creation changes how you see your time. Weeks turned into months. That 1 hour a day didn't look impressive on any single day, but over time, it accumulated, skills improved, ideas formed, small projects started to take shape. Nothing dramatic, but something real. And here's the part most people miss. The power isn't in the hour. It's in the consistency. Because consistency compounds, not in a visible way at first, but in a way that builds momentum. The more you show up, the easier it becomes to continue. The more you continue, the more progress becomes natural. And eventually, what once felt like effort becomes part of who you are. But there's a twist that most people don't expect. It's not about finding extra time. It's about reclaiming the time you already have. Most people think they need a perfect schedule to start. More freedom, more flexibility. But the truth is, the structure you have now is enough. What changes is how you use it. Ryan didn't quit his job. He didn't wait for the perfect moment. He just used 1 hour differently. And over time, that hour started to change everything around it. Because once you begin building something of your own, your relationship with time shifts. You become more aware of where it goes, what it produces, what it wastes, and that awareness leads to better decisions. Not overnight, but gradually. There's another layer to this that matters even more. That 1 hour isn't just about building something external. It's about changing how you see yourself. Most people identify with the system they're in, their job, their role, their routine. But when you start creating something outside of that, even in a small way, your identity begins to shift. You're no longer just someone who works. You're someone who builds. And that shift changes your behavior. Because builders think differently. They look for opportunities. They notice patterns. They turn ideas into actions. Not perfectly, but consistently. And that consistency is what eventually creates separation. Not instantly, but inevitably. Ryan didn't see massive results in the first month, or even the second. But around the third month, something small happened. One of the things he built started to get attention. Not a lot, but enough to show that it worked. And that's all it takes. One signal, one piece of evidence that what you're building can exist beyond you. That moment changes everything. Because now, it's not just an idea, it's real. And once something becomes real, it becomes easier to build on, easier to improve, easier to scale. That's how the process works. Not through sudden breakthroughs, but through small, consistent actions that accumulate into something meaningful. And here's the part that matters most. You don't need to escape your current life to start building a new one. You build the new one quietly, while the old one is still running, 1 hour at a time. Because in the end, the difference between staying stuck and moving forward isn't talent. It isn't luck. It's what you choose to do with the time you already have. Chapter 5. If it doesn't repeat, it doesn't scale. Most people believe growth comes from doing more. More work, more clients, more effort. And at the beginning, that feels true. You take on more, you earn more, and it looks like progress is happening. But after a while, something starts to feel off. You're busier than ever, yet nothing feels lighter. Every dollar still requires your time. Every result still depends on your presence. And no matter how much you've already done, you're always starting again. That's the hidden limitation most people never question. If your work doesn't repeat, your income can't scale, it can only stretch. There's a quiet difference between income that grows and income that exhausts you. One builds over time, the other resets every day. At first, they look the same. Both require effort, both bring results. But over time, they lead to completely different lives. I remember talking to someone named Hannah who worked in marketing. She was sharp, reliable, always in demand. Her schedule was full, her clients were satisfied, and from the outside everything looked successful. But every time we spoke, there was a pattern in what she said. I just need to get through this week. It didn't matter how much she earned. There was always another deadline waiting. Another project, another round of revisions. Nothing carried forward. Everything ended. One evening, after finishing a project that had taken weeks of effort, she said something that stayed with me. I gave them something that will probably work for months, and I get paid once. That sentence reveals something most people overlook. You can create long-term value and still be paid short-term. That's when her thinking began to shift. Not how do I get more clients, but why am I creating things that only pay once? That question doesn't feel urgent at first, but once it settles in, it changes how you see your work, because it exposes the difference between effort and leverage. Hannah didn't make a dramatic move. She didn't quit her job or announce a big change. She just started paying attention. She noticed how often she repeated herself. Same strategies, same frameworks, same explanations, different clients, but the core was always the same. Instead of treating each project as something new, she began capturing what was already working. She wrote it down, step by step, clear, simple, repeatable. At first, it was just for her, a way to stop reinventing the same process. But as she refined it, something changed. Her work became easier, faster, more consistent. Then she shared it with a small group online. No launch, no pressure, just something useful. And people responded. They understood it. They used it. They shared it. That's when she realized something important. She wasn't just doing work anymore. She had created something that could exist without her, so she took it one step further. She organized it, simplified it, and turned it into something others could access on their own. The first few sales were small, but they felt different. Because they didn't come from new effort, they came from something she had already built. That's the moment most people underestimate. Not the size of the result, but the nature of it. Because once something you create continues to produce value without you being there, even in a small way, your entire approach changes. Here's the twist most people miss. Scaling is not about doing more. It's about repeating what already works without starting over. Most people try to grow by adding more. More hours, more projects, more responsibility, but that approach always hits a ceiling. Because your time has a limit, and once it's full, growth stops. Systems grow differently. They grow through repetition, the same value delivered again and again, without requiring you to rebuild it each time. I saw this in a completely different field with someone named Leo. He was a photographer. At first, he followed the usual path. Client work, custom shoots, one project at a time. Each job required his full attention. Each payment came at the end, and then it was over. But there was something else happening in the background. People kept asking him the same question. How do you edit your photos like that? At first, he answered casually, a quick message here, a short explanation there. But the question kept coming back, again and again. One day, instead of answering, he recorded the process. Nothing polished, just real. He walked through exactly what he did, step by step. He shared it, and people responded immediately, because it solved a problem they already had. So he refined it, made it clearer, easier to follow, more structured, and offered it as something people could access anytime. The result wasn't instant success, but it was something more important. It continued. People found it, used it, paid for it, without him being there. That changed how he saw his work. He didn't need to chase every opportunity anymore. He could build something that stayed. That's the difference between income and assets. Income requires you to show up. Assets continue to work after you leave. And once you understand that, your focus shifts. You stop asking how to do more and start asking how to make your work last. Hannah still works with clients. Leo still takes photos, but neither of them relies only on effort anymore. They've built something that continues alongside it. That's where real growth begins. Not in doing more, but in doing something once and allowing it to keep working. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't look impressive at first. But over time, the difference becomes undeniable. Because while one path keeps resetting, the other keeps building. And eventually, that difference becomes your freedom. Because in the end, it's not about how much you work. It's about whether your work continues, even when you don't. Chapter 6. Leverage is what multiplies you. There comes a point where working harder stops being the answer. You've already understood the trap. You've started building something of your own. Maybe you've even created something that works without you, even if only a little. But there's still a limit you can feel. No matter how focused you are, no matter how disciplined you become, everything still depends on you showing up. Your time, your attention, your energy. And that's where growth slows down again. Not because you're stuck, but because you're still relying on the same tool, effort. What changes everything at this stage is something most people misunderstand. Leverage, not doing more, not pushing harder. Leverage is what allows your effort to expand beyond you. Most people imagine leverage as something big. A team, a large business, a lot of resources. But it doesn't start there. It starts in small, almost invisible shifts. I saw this happen with someone named Chris. He was a freelance designer, skilled, consistent, always improving. His work was solid and clients trusted him. At first, everything followed a simple pattern. A client would come in, he would complete the work, he would get paid, and then he would start over. It worked, but it was demanding. Every new result required fresh effort. At one point, he noticed something that most people overlook. A large part of his day wasn't spent creating. It was spent repeating, answering the same questions, making similar revisions, explaining the same process to new clients again and again. None of it was difficult, but all of it required his time. So instead of working harder, he tried something different. He started removing himself from the parts that didn't need him. He created templates for common requests. He wrote clear onboarding instructions. He recorded short explanations instead of repeating the same answers. Small changes. Nothing dramatic, but something shifted. Tasks that used to take hours started taking minutes. Clients got answers without waiting. Work continued even when he wasn't actively involved in every step. That's leverage in its simplest form. Not adding effort, but reducing how much effort is needed for the same result. And once you see that, you start noticing it everywhere. Where are you repeating yourself? Where are you solving the same problem again and again? Where are you spending time on something that could continue without you? Chris didn't stop there. As his work grew, he reached another limit. Even with systems, there were still things that required execution. So he made another shift. He brought someone in to help. Not a full team, not a big expansion, just one person to handle tasks that didn't require his direct involvement. At first, it felt uncomfortable. Letting go always does. Because when you're used to doing everything yourself, control feels like safety. But control is also what keeps you limited. The first few weeks weren't smooth. There were mistakes, miscommunication, small frustrations. But over time, something changed. Work continued even when he wasn't the one doing it. Results still came in, even when his time was focused elsewhere. That's when growth started to feel different. Not heavier, lighter. Here's the twist most people don't expect. The goal isn't to do everything more efficiently. The goal is to stop being required for everything. Because as long as your presence is needed at every step, you become the bottleneck. Not your skill, not your opportunities. You. Leverage removes that bottleneck. It allows your work to extend beyond your time, beyond your attention, beyond your direct involvement. And leverage doesn't only come from people. It comes from systems, from tools, from decisions you make once that continue to create results. A friend of mine named Sarah experienced this in a completely different way. She was building an online presence, sharing ideas regularly. At first, it felt like a constant demand. Post, respond, engage, repeat. Every day felt like starting over. Everything required her attention. But over time, she noticed something. Some of her content kept working long after she posted it. People discovered it days later, weeks later, sometimes months later. They shared it, they responded to it, without her doing anything new. So she changed her approach. Instead of focusing on creating more, she focused on creating things that lasted. Ideas that stayed relevant, content that didn't expire. And something shifted. Her effort didn't increase, but her results did, because her work started to compound. That's another form of leverage, creating something once that continues to reach people over time. Most people focus on output, how much they can produce, how much they can do. But output alone doesn't create growth. Leverage does. Because leverage changes the relationship between effort and result. Instead of one action leading to one outcome, one action can lead to many. Chris reduced repetition. Sarah built compounding work. Both did less in one sense, but achieved more in another. That's the shift. Not working harder, but working in a way that multiplies. And once you begin to apply leverage, even in small ways, everything starts to change. Your time opens up. Your energy becomes more focused. Your work begins to extend beyond you. You stop thinking in terms of tasks and start thinking in terms of systems. Because in the end, growth isn't about how much you can handle. It's about how much can happen without you. And that's where real freedom begins. Chapter 7. The identity that keeps you stuck. There's something deeper than strategy that determines whether you move forward or stay exactly where you are. It's not your knowledge. It's not your skills. It's how you see yourself. Most people never question this part. They focus on what to do, what to build, what to learn next. But underneath all of that, there's an identity shaping every decision they make. And that identity quietly keeps them inside the same pattern. For most of your life, you've been trained to operate a certain way. You're given instructions, you follow them, you complete tasks, you get rewarded for doing things correctly. Then you enter the workforce, and the pattern continues. You're given responsibilities, you meet expectations, you get paid. Over time, that becomes who you are. Reliable, consistent, responsible. But there's a hidden trade in that identity. You become someone who waits for direction, waits for approval, waits for the next step to be defined for you. It doesn't feel like waiting. It feels like doing things the right way. I remember talking to someone named Michael. He was capable, intelligent, and disciplined. The kind of person who always performed well in structured environments. Good job, stable income, clear path. But every time we talked about building something outside of his job, there was hesitation, not confusion, resistance. At one point, he said something that explained everything. I don't know where to start unless someone shows me exactly what to do. That sentence reveals more than it seems. It's not about ability. It's about dependence on structure. Most people don't realize how much they rely on external systems to guide their thinking. A boss to assign tasks, a roadmap to follow, a clear process to trust. And when that structure disappears, they feel stuck. Not because they can't move, but because they've never learned how to move without direction. Here's the twist that changes everything. The system doesn't just control how you earn, it shapes how you think. If you spend years inside a structure where your role is to execute, you become someone who executes, not someone who initiates. And that difference matters more than any skill you could learn. Because building something of your own requires a completely different mindset. It requires you to act before you feel ready, to move without certainty, to figure things out without being told how. That feels uncomfortable at first, because it feels like you're doing something wrong. There's no checklist, no guarantee, no clear signal that you're on the right path. Just uncertainty. And for most people, that's enough to stop. Michael experienced this directly. After months of talking about change, he finally decided to try something small, not a big project, not a major shift, just a simple idea he had been thinking about. The first few days were frustrating. He kept searching for the right way to do it, the correct structure, the perfect plan. But it wasn't there. So he paused, not because he lacked time, but because he lacked certainty. That's when something shifted. Instead of trying to do it correctly, he decided to do it anyway. Imperfectly, without overthinking, without waiting. And something unexpected happened. Progress. Not perfect progress, but movement. That's when the identity started to change. Not suddenly, but steadily. He stopped asking, "What's the right way to do this?" and started asking, "What's the next step I can take?" That question seems simple, but it removes the need for permission. Over time, that shift becomes visible. You stop waiting for clarity and start creating it. You stop needing certainty and start building confidence through action. There's another layer to this that most people don't expect. Your environment reinforces your identity. If everyone around you is thinking the same way, making the same decisions, following the same structure, it becomes difficult to imagine a different path. Not because it doesn't exist, but because you don't see it happening. That's why change feels uncomfortable at first. You start thinking differently, acting differently, seeing things that others don't question, and it creates distance. But that distance is necessary, because you cannot build a different outcome with the same thinking that created your current one. Michael didn't transform overnight. He didn't suddenly have everything figured out. But he became someone who acted, someone who experimented, someone who built even when it felt uncertain. And that's the real shift. Not from employee to entrepreneur, but from someone who waits to someone who creates. Once that identity changes, everything else follows. You start noticing opportunities instead of waiting for them. You start testing ideas instead of overthinking them. You start building systems instead of depending on them. And here's the part most people overlook. No strategy works if your identity resists it. You can learn everything about systems, leverage, and income. But if you still see yourself as someone who needs permission to act, you will hesitate. And hesitation is what keeps people stuck. The system doesn't need to stop you. It just needs you to stay the same. That's why this chapter matters, because before you build anything external, you have to change something internal. How you think, how you act, how you define yourself. Because in the end, freedom isn't just about what you build. It's about who you become in the process. And once you become someone who creates instead of waits, the path forward stops feeling unclear. It becomes something you shape, step by step, decision by decision, until one day you realize something simple. You're no longer following a system, you're building your own. Chapter 8. Build a life that pays you. Back at the beginning, this journey feels like it's about money, more income, more freedom, more control. And those things matter. They are the reason most people start. But if you go far enough, something shifts. You begin to realize it was never just about money. It was about how your life feels when you wake up in the morning. Most people don't notice how much of their life is shaped by how they earn when they wake up, when they rest, when they travel, when they spend time with people they care about. Everything is built around work. Even their free time is defined by it. A few hours at night, a weekend, maybe a short break once or twice a year. And over time, that starts to feel normal. Until you step back and ask a different question. What would my life look like if my time wasn't controlled by how I earn? That question is uncomfortable, because most people don't have an answer. Not because they lack imagination, but because they've never had the space to think about it. I remember talking to someone named Daniel about a year after he started building something outside of his job. He didn't quit overnight. He didn't make a dramatic change. But slowly, something shifted. His side projects grew. His systems improved. His income started coming from more than one place. And over time, his dependence on a single paycheck began to fade. One day, in the middle of a simple conversation, he said something that changed the way I saw this entire process. I don't actually want to stop working. I just want to choose when and how I work. That's the shift most people don't expect. Freedom isn't about doing nothing. It's about having control, because when pressure is removed, work becomes something different. It becomes intentional, something you choose, not something you're forced into. Daniel didn't suddenly become wealthy, but he became something more valuable, flexible. He could take time off without anxiety. He could say no without fear. He could focus on what actually mattered instead of what was urgent. That's what building systems gives you, not just income. Options. There's another story that shows this from a different angle. A friend of mine named Laura spent years in a high-pressure job. Long hours, constant deadlines, always connected. She was successful by most standards, but she was also exhausted. At one point, she told me, "I don't even know what I do with free time anymore." That sentence says more than it seems. Because when your life revolves around work long enough, you stop building a life outside of it. After she started building something on the side, slowly, things began to change. At first, it was just an experiment, a small project. Then it started to grow, not fast, but consistently. Months later, she made a decision that would have felt impossible before. She reduced her working hours, not because she had to, because she could. And what surprised her most wasn't the financial shift. It was what happened with her time. At first, it felt unfamiliar, unstructured, almost uncomfortable. She had space, but didn't know how to use it. Then something shifted. She started reconnecting with parts of her life she had ignored for years, spending time without rushing, thinking without pressure, doing things that had no immediate return. That's when it becomes clear. Freedom isn't something you suddenly reach. It's something you learn how to use. Here's the twist most people don't expect. If you don't design your life intentionally, you will recreate the same structure you tried to escape, just with more income. Because habits don't change automatically. Mindset doesn't shift on its own. If you build systems but don't change how you live, you'll still feel controlled, just in a different form. That's why this stage matters. Not just building income, but deciding what it's for. What does your ideal day actually look like? Not in theory, in reality. When do you wake up? What do you spend your time on? Who do you talk to? What matters enough to protect? Most people never define this. So even when they gain more freedom, they don't know how to use it. Daniel eventually created a simple filter for his life. If something didn't give him growth, income, or meaning, he questioned why it was there. Not harshly, just honestly. And over time, his life started to reflect that clarity. Less noise, more intention, more alignment. Laura approached it differently. She didn't try to optimize everything. She simply protected what made her feel alive and built everything else around that. That's the final shift. Not from working to not working, but from reacting to designing. Because in the end, the goal was never just to escape the salary trap. It was to build a life that doesn't trap you again. And that only happens when your income supports your life, not the other way around. You don't need to rush this part. You don't need perfect clarity. But you do need to start asking better questions. Not how much can I earn, but what kind of life am I building? Because once your systems are in place, once your income is no longer tied to every hour you work, you're left with something most people never truly experience: choice. And what you choose to do with that is what defines everything that comes next. If you've stayed with me until this point, you already understand something that most people never stop to question. You've seen how the system works. You've seen why trading time for money creates a hidden limit. And more importantly, you've seen that there is another way to build your life. Not through shortcuts, not through hype, but through a shift in how you think, how you work, and what you choose to build. We started with a simple truth. If your income depends entirely on your time, your freedom will always be limited. From there, everything began to change. You saw how security isn't as stable as it looks. How effort alone can never scale. How systems allow your work to continue beyond your presence. How leverage multiplies what you do. And how your identity determines whether you stay stuck or move forward. And in the end, it was never just about escaping a salary. It was about building a life that gives you back control. A life where your time is not constantly traded away. A life where your effort creates something that lasts. A life where you can choose instead of react. But here's the part that matters most. None of this changes anything unless you act on it. Not in a big, overwhelming way, but in a small, intentional step. Maybe it's 1 hour today where you stop consuming and start creating. Maybe it's writing down something you've repeated 100 times and turning it into something that can last. Maybe it's simply asking yourself a better question. What can I build today that continues tomorrow? That's where everything begins. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need to feel ready. You just need to start differently. Because the difference between staying stuck and moving forward is rarely about knowledge. It's about action. And the moment you begin, even in a small way, your direction starts to change. Slowly at first, then more clearly. Until one day, you look back and realize you're no longer living the same life you once accepted as normal. If this message connected with you, don't keep it to yourself. There's someone in your life right now who is still stuck in that cycle. Working hard, doing everything right, but feeling like nothing is really changing. Share this with them. It might be the moment that shifts how they see everything. And if you want to go deeper, if you want to continue building this mindset and turning it into something real, make sure you stay connected for what comes next. Because this is just the beginning. Thank you for spending your time here. I'll see you in the next video.